What's up, guys? I'm going to have three plays in this morning video, a trio of plays to go along with all the football stuff that I have in my football videos. The college football video is up. I still like all the plays in that one. I think most of those numbers are still pretty much around where they are, except Louisville has actually gone up from 4 to 6. So I don't know if I'd really recommend laying the 6. I certainly like the side. I got a good number on that one at the 4. I like the side for sure, but you're losing some value if you lay the 6 on that one. So hopefully if you did lay it, you got the better number like I did in the middle of the week. College football, I'll just talk about a couple of the bigger games because I said that I would in my other video and I completely forgot. I said I would mention my thoughts on the Oregon USC game at least because that's like the biggest game on the slate, kind of two highly ranked Pac-12 teams. Oregon is like a 6.5 point favorite on the road there. The situation, I think, sets up better for Oregon than it does for Utah because Utah is coming off that huge win over USC. That's a big win, and to turn around and have to put in another max effort again right after that is tough, even though they're going to be focused again because they have Oregon coming into their house. So this is another big game, but having had that other huge game right before that, that was kind of a legitimizing win for Utah. It's going to be, I don't know how much left they're going to have in the tank by the end of this game against Oregon. And Oregon is a physical defense, whereas USC is not. Utah is the more physical between USC and Utah, and Oregon might be the most physical team in the conference. So this is not USC again coming in here. Oregon's defense is much better than USC's. USC's is awful, so I wouldn't expect Utah's offense to have as easy a time. Utah, as I mentioned in my college video, also they finally have decided to shut down their starting quarterback, he hasn't played yet this year, I don't think, but they finally decided that he's not coming back. So they've been doing well without him. Riesling, I don't even know what his name is. Riesling, he's a nice fine wine or whatever. No, so he's being shut down. So at least once they do that and they actually decide that that is the case, then that kind of goes out of your mind. It's like, okay, the quarterback that we have playing, that we've been playing with this season, he is the guy from now on. We know that. We don't even have to think about the possibility of our starter coming back and having to work him back in. So mentally that might like focus you a little bit more, but I don't think it's really affected Utah this season anyway. They've looked good like pretty much all season, and I don't think they've been really thinking about that anyway, but that's just a little bit extra there. But because Utah is having to play a second huge game in a row, Oregon is coming off a game where they kind of just tried to cakewalk through it. Basically, that was that game against Washington State, I believe, which I had a bet on. And Oregon was actually covering the huge number very briefly. But luckily, that did not wind up happening. So I won that bet on Washington State covering. But Oregon, that was a much easier game than what Utah had, obviously, because Utah had to play USC. So Oregon should be the team that's better rested in a way because they didn't have to put in a max effort in that game. And if anything, that's going to give you a little bit of value on Oregon because they didn't look great playing Washington State, and Utah looked very good because they beat USC. And the way that USC beat them, too, that was in dramatic fashion at the end, so that doesn't help Utah either. The fact that game had to go right to the wire, and that was max effort the whole way, pretty much. So I do like Oregon here, like as a lean at least. I don't think it's that strong, but I do lean that way. And they're laying 6.5 or whatever on the road. And some recreational bettors might look at this and think, hey, these teams are ranked, whatever they are, 8 and 10, or I don't even know what they are, but somewhere in that range, and think, hey, this one team is only slightly better, but they're laying 6.5 on the road, and think that there's value in taking the points at home. I think that that is sort of like a trap way of looking at it. Like the line might be a little bit of a trap in that way where like it almost looks too good to be true, that you're getting that many points with Utah. It almost, in a way, looks a little bit easy to take Utah with what we saw from these teams last week and with how they're ranked and whatever. So I would not fall into that. I would not go that way. I think that Oregon is the significantly better team, as the line is telling you that they are, and they're in the better spot here. So I lean Oregon in that one. And then the other big game, I guess, is the backyard cocktail party, or what do they call it? The world's biggest cocktail party in Jacksonville, Florida, between Florida, Georgia. It's always a huge game, always a hotly contested game. These teams pretty much seem to hate each other. I don't know why it's called the cocktail party, because when you're in white trash land on the Florida Georgia line, it's like, what cocktails are you drinking? Like, I don't even know. Some white trash shit cocktail, basically. Trash Paloma or something, where you're mixing Fresca in there instead of grapefruit juice. I don't even know what's happening. I don't know what goes on at the tailgates of that game, but everybody's going to be hammered by mid-afternoon. Georgia is a significantly better team. They're laying 14 and a half on what is basically a neutral site game. It's kind of between where the two schools are located. I think it's probably a little bit slightly closer to Florida, but both teams have their fan bases show up to this. Florida, I mean, Georgia is certainly the better team, but I slightly lean Florida just looking at the market quickly. I don't know, though, because people are going to tend to think that this is like a big game between the two teams and think that it's going to be competitive and think that that is a lot of points to be laying and might want to take Florida there just because they're getting so many points. But then again, Georgia has had the upper hand recently and have looked way better than Florida, and they are significantly better. So that might make recreational guys not want to take Florida because they don't like to take the teams that are uglier. And Florida, the other time they faced like a pretty physical defense was against Utah, and they didn't do well against Utah, didn't score much. So I don't know if I would expect Florida to be able to score too much in this game, but I kind of expect this to be physical, defensive, and when it's a game like that, I would tend to want to lean towards the team that's getting a whole ton of points. So this one's really tough to read. The market read is what I kind of just come down to on this, because I don't think there's that much of a situation here to look at. I think both of these teams are actually coming out of byes, so you would expect like the defense to be pretty physical here. The defenses are rested for a week. They've gotten ready for this game. They've been able to prepare for it. And I think Florida might maybe have like a little bit of revenge in mind, I think, because I don't know how many times they've lost this game recently, but they've lost the recent iterations of this game, so they might be the somewhat more pissed off team here. So getting all those points in a game that I kind of expect defenses to show up is kind of the way I would want to look there. Let's start with the NHL, where I have one play, and the line has moved on this, so a little bit of value has maybe been lost on this. I'm looking at Toronto, Nashville. I think this is a good spot for Nashville and a bad spot for Toronto. Toronto's gone down from minus 155 to minus 127, although I think maybe some of that has to do with the goaltender decision, who they're starting in net for this game, which is going to factor into my handicap a little bit here, because I think it is a negative for Toronto. But this looks like, even though the line's gone down on Toronto, it looks like it's reverse line movement against where the tickets are. Toronto's got 67% of the tickets. Nashville's got 88% of the cash, according to what I'm seeing here. But I like Nashville for a whole bunch of reasons here. And let me bring the schedule back up here so I can refresh my memory. I was just looking at all this morning, and I'm like, yeah, I like this. Toronto, so they're in the worst rest spot, I would say, for sure. So they I believe they've had only one day off, and they're coming off a big win. They're in the middle of a road trip. They've been playing really well on the road trip. They just beat Dallas, which is a pretty big win. So they started the road trip. They've had a few days off on the road trips. At least that's not horrific for them, but they've played Florida, Tampa, Washington, Dallas on this road trip all since the 19th. So they have had a couple days off in there, but they beat Tampa in OT, beat Washington, which I thought that might have been like kind of a bad spot for Toronto. They're sandwiched between two bigger games, but they were able to keep the effort up there, beat Washington, and then 2 days later, which was 2 days ago, they went into Dallas and beat Dallas. Now they finished the road trip today, and they have to come back home next and play the Kings, and then immediately go back out on the road again to face Boston. A couple of bigger games there. This almost kind of looks like a sandwich to me. Nashville, it's possible they might not totally pay attention to Nashville, because Nashville has like the below 500 record, and Toronto's been rolling. So Toronto's going to be kind of the more public team here. They've won 3 in a row, beating Dallas. That's a big win, like a pretty tough win. Dallas has been pretty good recently. Playoff team in the recent years. Last year as well, they got knocked out by Vegas in the playoffs. They're tough again this year. Good team, so that's a tough game there. Now Toronto has to come into this game, and Toronto is going to be playing their second string goalie in this game, which is Samsonov. So they've been much better with Woll in net. Wall in net. Wall has been like their best goal, even though they have won 2 out of 3 that Samsonov has played. If you look at those games were not games where they did well as far as how many goals they allowed. One of the games was a 6-5 shootout win at the beginning of the season against Montreal, and that's not very impressive, allowing 5 goals to Montreal. Then they gave up 4 goals in a 7-4 win against Minnesota, both at home. And then the other game was a 3-1 loss at Florida, which I don't know if you can really blame them for that loss. That's a tough game. It's in Florida. Florida's not a bad team for sure. But those are Samsonov's games. The games that Wall has been in net, they've been much, much better. But he's played all of the games on the road trip since that Florida game. He's been in net all those 3 wins, and it's going to go back to Samsonov today. And like I said, they've allowed, 5, 4, and 3 goals in the games that he's played so far. His goals against average is 4.34. His save percentage, 83.1. That's not good at all. Wall, on the other hand, 1.33 goals allowed average and 96.1% save percentage. That's just this year in like a small sample size, sure, but Wall has been the much better of the 2 goalies, but today they got Samsonov in net. So I don't think that's good, and Nashville has more days off. I believe they have multiple days off for this, and so they've been off since the 24th, and going into that rest, so they have not even had to travel. They just stay at home, and the last game they had before they get this rest was a loss to Vancouver, which Vancouver's a pretty good team. Nashville, if you look at their losses, they're against Tampa, Boston, Edmonton, and Vancouver. So all their losses have been to good teams. So I think that means there's a little bit of value to be had on Nashville because they played a rough schedule early, and they've beaten the Rangers. They played Seattle in there. So they've had some pretty tough games. Really the only game they played against an opponent who's not good at all is San Jose, which they won easily. But so Nashville, looking at their record being below 500 versus Toronto's being above 500 doesn't mean that much early in the season. Nashville has played like a gauntlet so far. But now Nashville, they lost to Vancouver. Tough game, 3-2 loss. They don't have to travel. They get 3 days off to prepare for this one, even though they do have kind of quick revenge against Vancouver next, which is going to be on the road to start their road trip. I think they're going to be focused. Toronto's like a big name team, and they have a good record. They're coming in. Nashville's off that loss. That's kind of an ugly way to go into that few days off that they had there, that rest. So I think that could function kind of like a bye where you get to refocus a little bit and you get that rest. And Nashville is, I believe they're going to have Saros in net again. He's one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. And he's played every single game so far this season, but they're going to have a big goaltender advantage that they have the extra rest here, and it's going to be Saros against Samsonov, and Saros is the much better goalie here. Nashville is getting the underdog price at home. I think that's value for sure. I like it. I don't think they're that much. I don't think they're that significantly worse than Toronto is. I think it's a bit closer than that. And the goaltender matchup favors Nashville. The rest favors Nashville. So that all kind of evens out. I took plus 126 on this. I think you can still find prices in that like 120 range out there. Nashville Predators. Let's do that, baby. Let's go. And then, now we got to talk about the NBA. This is going wild. And I'm trying to not give my thoughts on some of these other games here just to make this video quicker, even though I might have some thoughts on a few of these other games. The NBA has a lot of games here where, like, I think both teams are just in bad situations. But we have 2 games where I think there are teams in bad situations against teams in much better situations. Maybe there's been a little bit of value lost on this, but I still like this one. I'm going to go with the Washington Wizards, which no one is going to want to take the Wizards in this spot. Hosting the Memphis Grizzlies. Everybody knows the Grizzlies are the better team. They're a playoff team last year. They have some star power on that team. But the Grizzlies have slipped from a 3-point favorite down to a 1. But I think it was more like it was mostly 2.5 everywhere. And it's kind of in the 1.5 range. I was able to take 1.5 with the Wizards, which I think is still a go, even though 2 is kind of a key number in basketball because it's one bucket. But there's not a huge difference, I wouldn't say. Grizzlies, this is a reverse line movement, I think, because it's gone down. The number's going down on them, and they have 75% of the tickets on them, but 76% of the cash on the Washington Wizards. The Grizzlies, their schedule, I think, is much worse than the Washington Wizards, and I think it almost looks like a trap. It almost looks too easy with that number to take the Grizzlies, even though they're 0-2. They're a playoff team. Everybody knows that they're a good team. They're better than Washington. Washington, I believe, is also winless, which I'll talk about in a minute. But people are going to think, yeah, Memphis is clearly the better team. We're basically just taking them to win the game. That's like automatic. That's so easy. When it looks too easy, like I say, I think it usually is. I think it looks too easy here. Memphis is playing a third game in 4 days, and they're on a back-to-back. And they're going on the road here just for this one game. They have to go to Washington. I don't know how excited you can get. Like, if you're starting a road trip and you're going to be playing multiple games on the road, I think that's a positive where you kind of like focus and you focus on that first opponent. But when this is a back-to-back, you just played last night and you're only traveling for this one game to Washington, how focused are you going to be on the Washington Wizards when you're going to come home and play Dallas 2 days from now in the next game? This is not a good scheduling spot for Memphis. And what did they do last night? They played the Denver Nuggets at home. They hosted the Nuggets, and they played a tough game, man. Even though the Nuggets were winning for most of that game, but Memphis was in the game. They never really allowed the deficit to get that big. They played tough pretty much the whole game, and they caught all the way up and made it really close near the end, and they had chances to win that game at the end, and they just barely let it slip. And I'd said that I leaned Memphis to cover the spread, which I think they did cover most of the numbers. Denver was actually up to 6.5 on tip-off there. I think when I saw it was like 5.5, so Memphis covered the spread in that when they played a tough game in their own house against the defending champs, and now with no time off, they have to go face Washington Wizards. Yeah, that's not good. I don't think that's a good spot. That explains why there's money coming in, driving the number down on the Wizards there, which unfortunately I didn't get the best numbers there, but I took plus 1.5, which I think is still good. The Wizards have only played one game so far, so I don't know nobody's going to want to take the Wizards, because what did they do in that game? They lost to the Indiana Pacers, who I don't think anybody thinks are really that good. And not only did they lose, they gave up 143 points in that game. That is awful. Nobody's going to want anything to do with Washington. Nobody's going to want to touch Washington here. I will touch them. They have multiple extra days off here, too. They've had 2 days off in this situation. This is their home opener, and it's against a team that was in the playoffs last year. I think you're going to get a focused Wizards team. Memphis, like I said, they put in a max effort last night. They have no rest. They're traveling, and this is a game where they might not be totally focused on their opponent, even though they do still need to get their first win. Both of these teams are winless so far, so I like Washington. The market is indicating fairly strongly on it as well, so unfortunately, like I said, I didn't get it on the best number, but I like it quite a bit. And the other way I'm going to look here is going to be on the Minnesota Timberwolves, and unfortunately, this line has crept up as well from 3.5 to looking like it's getting up to 5. I laid 4.5 on the Timberwolves. I like this one between 4.5 and 5. I don't think it's that much of a difference. I think 7 is actually kind of key-ish as a number. Once you get above 2 and 3, I think 7 is kind of the more key number in the NBA, if there even really is one, because that's when you're down by 3 scores instead of 2. So that's when a team kind of like will decide to like pack it in at the end of the game, if anything. But what do we have going on here? This is kind of a bit of a similar situation to what I just talked about in that other game, why the line has gone up. And also we have 54% of the tickets look like they're actually on the T-Wolves, but 87% of the cash on the T-Wolves. So it looks like the Heat is getting more of the public action, whereas more of the pro action is on the T-Wolves, which I think you're kind of seeing in the number, which is why the number has been being driven up. But the situation that we have here, I think, dictates what's going on here. Miami is another team that is in a third game in 4 days and a back-to-back. And not only is that the case, but it's in 3 different cities. They played in Miami and they escaped against Detroit, which was that game that I actually had a bet on, where Miami actually dominated them for most of the game, but then they kind of had to put in a little bit of more effort at the end of that game because it got close somehow after Miami was blowing them out. Then, last night, they had to go to Boston, play the Eastern Conference Finals rematch against a Boston team that I am sure must have been pretty angry with the way the Eastern Conference Finals lost, with the way they lost the Eastern Conference Finals to Miami last year. That was a big game for both of these teams, really, but really a big game for Boston. Boston was able to exact a little bit of revenge there and beat Miami and come like right at the number, basically, which was 8. Boston won by 8. That's a tough game for Miami to have to play. Now they have to turn around, no time off, and they have to go to Minnesota, which they have to travel west 1 time zone for that. And then Minnesota, even though they were a playoff team last year, Boston is a much bigger opponent to have to face. Minnesota's an out-of-conference opponent, at least, so they're a Western Conference team. After this, Miami has to go to Milwaukee and face the Bucks, who are another one of the top teams in their conference, in the East. So this almost kind of looks like a sandwich in a way, too. So they play Boston, then they have to go on the road even, then they have to go to Minnesota, which could be a spot where they overlook the T-Wolves a bit, and then they have to go to Milwaukee right after that, and then back home to face Brooklyn, some more like kind of big-name Eastern Conference opponents there. I think it's a sandwich. Boston and Milwaukee are kind of the two, considered to be 2 of the top dogs in the conference. And I think Miami maybe thinks that they get a little bit disrespected there as being considered to be a little bit worse than those 2 teams, although I think that is the case. I think Boston and Milwaukee are better than Miami by a little bit. But Miami has to play this game between those 2 much bigger games. Minnesota has only played 1 game on the season, and they've had multiple days off, and they're still looking for their first win. They lost in Toronto to open the season, and now they have 2 days off to prepare for this. I think they're going to be focused. This is the Eastern Conference Finals representative from last year coming into their building for their home opener. Similar situations in both of these. I like the Minnesota T-Wolves. I laid the 4.5, and I think the public, what they're going to think is they're going to think Miami's the better team here, and because Miami was in the finals last year, and Minnesota got knocked out in the first round of the playoffs. They're going to think that there's value on Miami here, getting 4.5, possibly even 5. They're going to think, hey, that's a lot of points to be taken with Miami. There's got to be value there, right? Again, I think it's a little bit too good looking to be true there. And that's why I'm doing this. Miami is in the much, much worse spot, even though I think that factors into the line a little bit. I think it tends to get under-factored into the line because the books know that there's still going to be that like public action that's going to come in on that more popular team, which in this case is Miami. So all that, all that leads me to being on the Minnesota T-Wolves and on the Washington Wizards in the NBA. And then, like I said, NHL, the Nashville Predators. So officially, it is the Minnesota T-Wolves minus 4.5, Washington Wizards plus 1.5, and Nashville Predators plus 126. And unfortunately, I'm jumping in slightly late on those games, not getting the absolute best number. But there is also something to be said for waiting like a slight amount to see like where the market is going to put you, because those market signals can be pretty strong. And then you see that market signaling, and then you look at the situation and go, whoa, yeah. So when situation and market agree, I like it. I think it's a strong play. Giving up slight value in the numbers there, but I like it all. I like my college football plays. Go check out that college football video. I'm Toad, better off dead. I'm dead, baby.